Welcome, everyone. It's great to see such a great crowd out here tonight. I'm Ron Payne. I'm the president of the Otter Creek Audubon Society. If you'd like to know some more about the Audubon Society, we have some great information over here. We hope you are all members or would like to become members. We would really appreciate that. You can also find information about us on ottercreekaudubon.com.
.org.
Org, here, sorry, org. Upcoming events, this Saturday we have a monthly wildlife walk at Otter Park in Middlebury, and then we go over to the Herd Grassland after that, which is nearby in Weybridge. It's 8 a.m. It's a really fun thing. We'd love to see people come after that. It's going to be warm, maybe wet. You might need some good boots. Coming up for the Salisbury Conservation Commission next Thursday at the Salisbury Elementary School. They're putting on a presentation called Climate Change in Vermont, presented by Dr. Alan Betts. For tonight, our presenter is someone who many in this room know very well. Warren King was an ornithologist for the Smithsonian Institution and an educator at the Keewaydin Environmental Education Center for 13 years. He received the 2002 Vermont Award from the New England Wildflower Society, the 2005 Charles H. Callison Award from the National Audubon Society for his volunteer service, and along with his wife Barry, the 2005 Eco-Spirit Award from the Spirit in Nature. And I can say personally he's an extremely valued member of the Otter Creek Audubon Society Board. So without further ado,
We're going to leave some lights on. Can everybody hear me? I'll do my best to talk this loud, but I'm not sure I'll last for the 5 hours that I intend to be up here. Ron, is the mic on? All set. Okay. Well, we're going to take a trip out west. We're going to go to Christmas Island first, and then we'll island hop, primarily to islands that you can't get to. That's I think the most interesting part of this little junket, as far as I'm concerned. The fact that I was awfully darned lucky to have made connection with the Smithsonian Institution back in the 1960s, and I was able to work on a seabird project out in the Pacific for 6 years. I wasn't out in the Pacific for those 6 years. 2 of them were back in Washington, D.C., doing a lot of writing. And if you have any interest in pursuing any of the publications that were resulting from that work, I've got 3 or 4 books over here that I did, and there are plenty of others that I could lay my hands on to get to you if you wanted. But it was a marvelous experience. We were covering new ground that had really not been, ground is the wrong term because it was pretty much all water. But it was an area that had not had any research done on it for many, many years. One of the consequences was that we didn't really know when we started what kinds of birds we were looking at. There wasn't any good field guide to the area. As a consequence, after 3 or 4 years, I wrote a preliminary field guide to the seabirds of the tropical Pacific Ocean. There never was a follow-up field guide, the final version, but the preliminary one was extremely useful, and there are a number of ornithologists in the world who have a highly thumbed copy of this book. It's a rare book now. I never sold a copy. Gave them all away. There were several hundred published. So, well, let's start off. We're going to take a look at the Pacific Ocean. We're going to fly, first of all, to Honolulu on Oahu, and then we'll go from there down to Christmas Island right here, just north of the equator. From here over to the Phoenix group, which is this group right in here, and then from there we'll go down here to Pitcairn Island, which I think is that one right there, and then finally over to Easter Island here. So if you came into the room thinking that we were going to be talking about calendars, you feel free to leave right now. So here's the plane that took us to Christmas Island, and I have to preface this by saying that the slides that you're seeing tonight, a few of them were pinched off the internet, not including this one. This is legit, but a number of them were taken from the internet. And there's very happy hunting for good pictures on the internet just now, and anybody can put together a good slide presentation with a little gumption. I want you to notice the runway, big puddles. Christmas Island is a dry island. It gets up to 38 inches of rainfall a year, but usually it's less than that, and often it's as low as 8 inches a year. But that wasn't the case the year that we went there. Christmas Island is 1,340 miles south of Hawaii. It's the world's largest atoll. It's 150 square miles, and it covers an area of 18 miles by 31 miles. It isn't all land. Some of it's water. And up in the upper left corner here, you can see a big lagoon. In that lagoon, there are 5 islands that are sanctuaries, and the rest of the island is pretty well uninhabited. But in fact, these days there's a population of about 5,000 people on the island in 4 towns, and the largest of the towns happens to be called London, and it has a population of about 1,800. We were going to Christmas Island, and we went there. Barry and I went there, my wife, in 1982 to band seabirds with a colleague of ours by the name of Ralph Schreiber. At least one person in the audience knows Ralph Schreiber, or did know. Ralph died a few years ago, quite prematurely, very unfortunate. So when you get off the plane, the first thing you see is this handsome sign. It tells you that you're 5 feet above the sea level, and that you're 119 miles north of the equator. The island was discovered by Captain James Cook in 1777, and it was discovered on Christmas Eve. And so what could he do? He had to call it Christmas Island. It's not to be confused with the Christmas Island that is in the Indian Ocean, which has its own spectacular seabirds. I've never been to that one. I'd love to go sometime. So here's the first sort of thing that greeted us when we got off the plane. And you'll notice down at the bottom of the picture, some of you at least can see it, there's a big puddle. And Christmas Island is coral and sand. And if you've ever been on an island that's coral and sand, you know that it doesn't hold water worth a darn. And so we were a little bit puzzled to try to figure out why all this water was hanging around. Well, it turns out that we got there right at the peak of the 1982-83 El Nino, which was the most intense El Nino in history. And it had serious adverse consequences on the bird life that we were there to study. Not all birds were affected, but many were. Here's an attractive little bird called a white tern, which is widespread throughout the Pacific. And that particular bird is perched on its nest. The nest of a white tern is either a piece of bare rock or a branch, and that's it. Nothing built at all. And how they manage to keep that egg sitting there for the entire incubation period is beyond me. But they do it. They do it regularly, and they have. Yeah.
Finish your story.
What? Sorry.
Some people in the back say there's a lot of glare. Can we
Say
turn
again?
People in the back are saying there's a lot of glare. Can we turn the lights
Glare
off
from-
for what? From the
From the lights?
Can we turn them off for a while and then turn them back on when we
I
need?
could. I can't see this though.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just have to put up with
Just
it.
gotta.
Okay. So here's an adult white tern, and what is one of the things that's interesting about a white tern is its ability to hang on tight. If you look at the feet of the white tern, you'll notice that it, like many terns, it has webbed feet, but the webs have receded significantly, and that allows it to have a greater purchase with its toes, which it needs in order to stay balanced on the branch, which has an egg on it, which is being incubated by the bird. Here's a youngster white tern, and it too has the ability to hang on tight. There's nothing you could do to get that bird off that person's finger. It's there for keeps until it decides it wants to go.
So, Warren, does that mean one egg at a time?
One egg at a time. This is one of the birds we were going to be studying. The person on the right is Ralph Schreiber, and the bird on the left is a red-tailed tropic bird. And those of you who are up close might be able to see this little red line that goes down here. And that's the red-tailed tropic bird's red tail. It's a single, very narrow red feather that extends about 2 feet out from behind the bird. We were going to be banding red-tailed tropic birds and frigate birds for some research that Ralph had been conducting on the island. He would take 2 or 3 folks down there. He and his wife, Betty Ann, would take 2 or 3 folks down to Christmas Island to help them each year. And one year, Barry and I got to be the lucky pair that joined them. Although we didn't, as it turned out, do much bird banding, which is what we expected to do. You can maybe see the red tail a little bit better in that picture. It's very prominent, and it figures prominently in their display flights. And sometimes out at sea, you'll get 2 or 3 or 4 red-tailed tropic birds doing display flights, and they will fly in a great pinwheel, going backwards. They'll fly up like this, and then they'll come back, and the next one flies up like that, and they'll make these pinwheels, 3 or 4 of them at a time, in the air to try, I presume, to try to attract a mate. Here's Ralph measuring the bill of this red-tailed tropic bird. Because of the rain, we very quickly realized that red-tailed tropic birds were not going to be abundant the way they normally are on the island. In fact, there were very few of them. We were lucky even to find a couple that we could take photographs of, because the temperature of the water around Christmas Island was 4 degrees Fahrenheit higher than usual. Being on the equator, it's fairly constant temperature, and that 4 degrees made all the difference. It meant that virtually none of the fish that would normally be present around the island for seabirds to feed on were there anymore. They had either died, which is the more likely, or they had traveled some distance away to find cooler water. That's Barry and me, and we're standing at a specific site on Christmas Island. This is the site of the 1,000-foot tower, which was the place where in the 1950s the Great Britain government did a series of atomic tests, And that was followed in the early 60s by a series of atomic tests by the US government in the same site. For a number of times, the tower itself was the place where the test took place, 1,000 feet up in the air. The problems with the radiation were poorly enough understood at that time so that they did not evacuate anybody from the island. And there were some consequences with the Gilbertese people who lived there as a consequence. It's a hot climate, tends to be in the mid 80s to high 80s, and you're never cool. So shorts is what you live in there. Here's a bird I'll wager nobody in this room has seen. Maybe Susan has seen it. Do you know what it is, Susan? This bird was described by Captain James Cook's researcher and biologist. He called it the Tuamotu sandpiper. And the Tuamotu sandpiper no longer lives on Christmas Island. It's extinct there, but it does occur on half a dozen islands in the Tuamotu group where the population is small. Wherever there are rats on an island, and most of the islands in the world have rats on them, there are no Tuamotu sandpipers. It's endangered. Here's a sandpiper that is vulnerable, and it's a lovely thing. This is a bird that breeds in North America, in Alaska, in fact, and its breeding site was found in 1948. It was actually described from the series of voyages that Captain Cook made, and so this bird was first known about in 1777, and its breeding site wasn't discovered until 1948 in the tundra in Alaska. And you've seen a nest, haven't you? Bristle-thighed curlew. I'm sorry, I didn't give you the name. This is the Christmas Island warbler. It occurs on one other island near Christmas Island. It doesn't do very well in Christmas. There are about 400 of them on the island. And that's a pretty small population to cover an area of about 18 miles by 31 miles. But it's a bird that the government of the country of Kiribati is very proud of, so much so that they have put it on one of their stamps. Kiribati now comprises the Marshall Islands, the Gilbert Islands, the Ellis Islands, for those of us who grew up with a different atlas altogether, and several island groups south of there, some of the Line Islands, the Phoenix Islands, and one or two others that I'm forgetting right at the moment. So it's a large tract of the globe's surface, but almost all of it is water. It's actually an area the size of the United States, but there's only a few hundred square miles of land. Well, this is one of the birds that we came to work with. This is a great frigate bird, and this is a male, and he is displaying. And that red thing is a gular pouch, a pouch that he can expand with air on his throat. And when that's expanded, he thinks he's pretty hot stuff. And the females underneath him on the bushes tend to pay no attention to him. They visibly and clearly are paying no attention to him. They're seeing him all the same. Well, this is the sort of thing that we found. On the left is an immature lesser frigate bird that is so weak that it can't keep its head erect any longer. It probably hasn't been fed in 3 or 4 weeks, and it will almost surely die. On the upper right, there is one immature frigate bird that will probably make it. It's got its head erect, and it's pretty close to fledging. Fledging means flying away from the nest. And just above that are two birds that didn't make it. And they died from starvation, and they probably are being taken care of by rats on the island. There are rats and cats on Christmas Island in abundance. And the lower right picture shows a couple of lesser frigate birds with some dead ones as well. So we did not have any luck in banding any frigate birds. We just gave up that altogether and went elsewhere. One of the places we went, here's a frigate bird that's going to make it. Oops, sorry, went too fast. Here's Ralph Schreiber weighing one of the frigate birds. And frigate birds weigh next to nothing. They have very hollow bones. Most birds have hollow bones, but frigate bird bones are so hollow that the youngsters on the nest, if you are going to go banding them and you catch them, you pick them up off the nest, if you pick them up too hard, it breaks their wings. It doesn't take much. And they get a little stronger as they get older, but we learned that the hard way. The first couple of times we tried to band frigate birds, so we broke some birds' wings. Here is a tail feather being measured, one of the standard measurements that we make. And we're going to see some live birds, happy birds, in Motu Tabu, which is one of the sanctuaries in the lagoon on the northwestern end of Christmas Island. You can land there if you get the proper permission, which we had. This is a Christmas shearwater. It was discovered on Christmas Island once again on Captain Cook's expedition there, and for a shearwater, it's got a fairly slender, fairly short bill. It's all dark, no white feathers on it at all, and the birds that you might confuse it with are this pair of wedge-tailed shearwaters. You notice the tail sticking up behind the one on the right, and you'll also notice that the bill is longer and stouter than the Christmas shearwater, and over here you've got some white scalloping or whitish scalloping on the back feathers and the flight feathers of the bird. So it isn't impossible to tell from a Christmas shearwater. You just have to know what you're looking for. In the tropics, the wedge-tailed shearwater has a dark breast. When you get up into the subtropics, where Hawaii, for example, you get wedge-tailed shearwaters like this one, which is the white phase. It's the same species. It just looks rather different because underneath it's all white. And wedge-tailed shearwaters nest in burrows. And one of the things that we did on the Pacific Ocean Biological Survey program with the Smithsonian was to band large numbers of these. And I can remember the very first time that I reached my arm into the burrow that the bird had made, and we were pretty sure he was in there. These are sometimes called moaning birds. That's the name that the people who were stationed on Midway Atoll, for example, would call them. They would call them moaning birds, and they would make a noise. I'll do my best to mimic it now. It's been a few years since I've heard it, but it's pretty much unmistakable. They go, oh, oh, oh. Pretty eerie, because they only do it at night. But I can remember reaching my hand into that burrow, and it hurt. But I had him, or he had me. So I extracted my arm and my finger, got the bird, and we banded it. I did that so many times I didn't even think twice about it. Hands all cut up. That's just one of the prices you pay for studying seabirds. Hands that are all beat up. Here's a rarity. This is an endangered bird that occurs only on islands that don't have rats. This is a white-throated storm petrel, and it's a delightful little thing. It's about that long, and it's very docile in the hand. It's funny. Some birds are docile in the hand, and some birds are extremely squirmy. And I don't have a picture of a bonin petrel, which is a very common petrel in the Hawaiian Islands and elsewhere in the Central Pacific. A bonin petrel is not much bigger. It's about that long wings, and it's a squirmer. And you can hold on to it, and it's a very strong bird. And it will squirm to the point where you cannot hold on to that bird. It will just squirm out of your hand. Two hands, maybe you can hold on, and then there are other petrels where you take the bird, you lay it on your hand, and it sits there, and it sits there, and finally, I don't know why some are docile and some are squirmy, but they certainly are. Okay, we're going to head south now to the equator. We've got two islands up in the upper left there, Howland and Baker. They both belong to the United States. They had a major role to play in the Second World War. Baker had a big airstrip on it, and it was the place that Amelia Earhart was supposed to land, but she never did. And there's increasing evidence that where she actually did land was on this island right here, formerly called Sydney, Nikumororo now. The Phoenix Islands are all part of the Phoenix Island protected area, and they're all listed in the World Heritage List by the United Nations, and they are all part of a huge seabird sanctuary. We're going to land on three of the islands in rapid succession here. The first one is this is a typical atoll. Has an outer ring of land and a big lagoon in the center. And this is Hull Atoll. It goes by the name of Orona now because the Kiribati people own this island, and that's what the traditional name is. And we landed on this. There were about 8 of us, or maybe 10 of us. I can't remember now because we're going back. This is back in 1964. I was there. So these slides that I'm showing you next are about 50 years old, and we were living here in the little settlement that was occupied for a number of years by Gilbertese to work the coconut plantations that were all the way around the island. Some of the islands had rats and cats on them. Some didn't. So we're going up to this island, which is cat and rat free. And every night we would get into our rubber raft with a head and outboard on the back. We would start off. Now the scale of this is not at all apparent from this photograph. This is taken from space, and this is 5 miles from here to here, and this is 2.5 miles from here to here. So we traveled that at night to get to the island at the far end, and you would think that all you have to do is set your compass and off you go, but it wasn't quite as easy as that. There were no landmarks whatsoever. You couldn't see anything, pitch black, except for the stars. And we wanted it pitch black. If it had been full moon, we would have been in trouble because the birds we're going to catch are catchable only in the dark. And so it was an interesting navigational problem. We used the stars to some extent, and we were all pretty poor at doing that, but we got ourselves back and forth every night. The other thing we had to watch out for was coral heads, and each of these little freckles that you see there is a coral head, and there were a lot more that don't show up on that map. And so somebody had to kneel right at the bow of the boat to watch out for coral heads and shout out loud, "Coral head!" And then the boat would dodge one way or the other. Interesting problem. So we're going to be banding sooty terns up on that island. Here's a sooty tern. I wish someone could tell me if that was a male or a female. They can tell, but people can't. They're virtually identical. Sooty tern and some of its young. Young are looking rather like European starlings to my eye. And there's a sooty tern egg in the background. And now we're getting up to some numbers. The sooty tern population in the tropical Pacific is
this still on that island?
Still on Hull Island, yes. When we were banding there in 1964, there were about 3 million sooty terns on that island. It was a colony that had never been banded before, and so we would go out at dusk. We would band. We would be given bands by the field leader. We'd be given bands, and we couldn't come in until we had put all our bands on. And each of us would receive 1,000 bands. And we've got some bird banders in the crowd, and I want to tell you, at the end of the trip, you fill out the banding schedules to send into the Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, where there's a big computer that keeps all that stuff. And what we were sending in was all 10,000 the same, one sheet for 10,000 birds banded, because we were just banding the adults. And you had a headlamp on when you're catching these things, not during the day but at night, and you walk up to the bird and shine the light in the bird's face and pick it up like this. And then you would slap it against your thigh. You'd have already put several opened bands in your mouth. You'd hurl the bird against your thigh with the bill coming out this way and the feet up like this. And then you'd spit out a band, put it on. You'd have banding pliers. You'd pinch the ends of the band together. That band has a unique number that will be recorded in the computer, telling anybody who finds it where the bird was banded and when it was banded. And if we were the people who banded that, we'll get a message back from the banding center telling us where it was recovered and when it was recovered. And we got some amazing recoveries of sooty terns from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from Japan, mostly birds that got caught in storms and got blown a long way. But it's perfectly clear that they travel huge distances out in the Pacific when they're not breeding. Well, each of us had 1,000 bands to take care of. And so you'd hold a bird on your leg like this, and two consequences of holding a sooty tern, adult sooty tern on your leg. One is that you get excrement running down the back of your leg. And not only that, you get the bird regurgitates all the food that it had to go out to sea to get. And we felt badly about this, but after the 50th or 100th time it happens, you don't feel quite so badly. And so your leg just gets coated with stuff. And that's one consequence. The other consequence is that the bill on this bird is skinny and sharp. But they're not terribly strong. And so he would reach up and he would pinch you right there. You could hardly feel it. The next one to pinch you right there. You could hardly feel it. By the 750th time, it was excruciating. And you could tell when people were getting about to that level of it through their bands when you'd hear a scream out in the distance, and sometimes, I confess, you'd see a sooty tern flying past you. There was good reason for it. All right. This is the range of the sooty tern in the Pacific Ocean, and you'll notice, with the exception of the New Hebrides here and a few small island groups, there are sooty terns breeding on all of these island groups. They're pretty much everywhere, but they have some requirements. They can't take too much disturbance. They can't take too many cats. They can't take too many rats. Otherwise they can't make it. The largest sooty tern colony in the Pacific in the 60s, when we were working out there, was on Christmas Island, and it was 25 million, and it was extraordinary. I never saw that colony. When we were there, the sooty terns were not there, and I don't know whether it was because they were driven off by the cats and rats, or because of El Nino, but one of the other. We're going to Enderbury Island. It's the next one. And Enderbury is about 2 miles long and a mile wide. It has a big lagoon in the middle. That's this area. It looks kind of like wetlands. That's highly saline water, and not very much lives in it. It's a little too saline for most ducks, and it's beyond most ducks' migratory range. A few shorebirds can make it that far, but that's about it. This is Enderbury as it looked when when we were there in 1964. You'll see a little cabin on the left-hand side, and this cabin was left over from the guano mining that took place between 1860 and 1880, and that cabin was just made of wood. And as you can see, there's no wood available on that island for building. The whole island looks like that, and so believe it or not, that cabin was 100 years old, and it got rained on pretty often, but it would dry out, and it was in reasonable shape, except the roof wasn't in good shape. We had to put a tarpaulin over the roof. Some of us lived in the cabin, and others lived in a tent. Sorry?
Guano mining, what's that?
Guano mining was something that took place on many seabird islands around the world. They would harvest the solidified excrement of the seabirds, take it, load it on ships, and take it back to Europe and to North America and Australia, where it was used for fertilizer. And most of the easy guano has already been gotten around the world now. Most of the fertilizer comes from other chemicals and from petroleum products. Well, boobies are common on Enderbury Island. This is a brown booby, and I want you to notice the egg of this bird. This egg is about the size of a chicken's egg, and the interesting thing is that a shearwater, we'll say wedge-tailed shearwater, is about a third the size of a brown booby, and its egg is larger than that egg. So shearwaters put a great deal of effort into their eggs, and boobies not very much effort into theirs. It takes them a long time to hatch, though. Here's a red-footed booby coming at us, and another red-footed booby with its nest on the ground. If there are shrubs, they'll nest in shrubs. But on Enderbury, there was a shortage of shrubs, and so they are nesting on the ground. Here's a red-footed booby youngster on its stick nest and just getting going. It's probably a couple weeks old. A larger one, getting relatively close to fledging, but still has a couple of weeks to go. Incubation takes 45 days. The bird fledges in 100 to 139 days, and post-fledging care by the adults is 190 days. And the bird starts to breed at either age 2 or age 3, depending on the bird. So it takes a long time for these birds to actually become airborne and get off into the ocean where they can start to harvest fish. This is another species of booby called the masked booby or blue-faced booby. And if you look carefully, you can tell the difference between males and females of this species. The male has the bill is sort of waxy colored, and the male has a yellower waxy bill, and the female is slightly less so. It's subtle, but in the flesh you can see it pretty clearly. Blue-faced boobies are the largest of the three tropical boobies in the tropical Pacific, and they are very strong. They have tremendous muscles in the back of their head, and here's one a female with her nest, so to speak. Nothing but bare ground, and they're quite elegant birds.
How large is that? Are they like
Goose-sized. Goose-sized. And here's an immature bird that still has a ways to go before it's breeding, but it's fending for itself now. Now, when you catch a blue-faced booby, you have to do it carefully. And some of us out there use gloves. Some of us were chicken. I always used gloves when I could. And you'd have to make sure that you were upwind of the bird, because in order to get airborne, in the same way that albatrosses do, you'd have to fly into the wind. You'd have to paddle along into the wind to get enough ground speed to get airborne. And so this particular bird would be trying to get past you to get into the wind to get up and away. And so if you played your cards right, you could stay upwind of him and gradually close in on him and get him under the bill and catch him by the neck, and then you had him pretty well, and you could turn him around and put him under your arm like this, and then you'd bend the neck down and hold the bill like this, and you could manipulate, put the band on with two fingers, holding the rest of the bird's head with the rest of your hand, and get the band on and band him that way. Sometimes
they bit you.
If they bit you, thank you. If they bit you, we learned quickly that you didn't pull away, because if you pulled away, some flesh from your finger would be pulled away at the same time, because they were very strong and very hard, and they have very sharp edges to their bill, so it slices right down as you pull away, and so you just didn't do that. You just let the bird hold on like this, and you carefully pried the bird's bill open and got your hand out. That was the only way that you could do it with a minimum of pain, and just the pressure of the tip of the bird's bill on your finger like this was enough to make you squeal. You weren't fooling around when you dealt with these guys. This was deadly serious. A bird similar to sooty tern, called the gray-backed tern or bridled tern, nests in some numbers on Middlebury, about 10,000 nests there. It doesn't go as far afield to get its food as a sooty tern does. And here's one of the rats that occurs out in the Pacific. This is the Pacific rat, also known as the Polynesian rat. And it's a cute little thing. It's about that long with a long tail. And it has done its share of killing of seabirds, particularly the small seabirds. The white-throated storm petrel that I mentioned earlier, showed you a picture of, they can't tolerate even this small rat. And there are a couple of other birds that we'll see that can't either. Some of the larger birds can tolerate them pretty well. But surprisingly, this bird has been documented to climb up onto incubating albatrosses in the Hawaiian Islands, Laysan albatrosses in particular. And the albatross goes into sort of a trance when it's incubating. It sits on the egg for up to 2 weeks straight before its mate comes in with a load of food, and the other bird can go off and find its own food. Well, the Pacific rats climb up on the back of the albatross while it's incubating, and worms its way in through the feathers and starts to gnaw on the back of the albatross. And it actually can enter the bird's internal cavity right through the bony back of the bird, and go right in and actually kill the bird. It's a pretty nasty guy. And the bird somehow doesn't seem to understand that it's being attacked by this rat. This is McKean Island, and we didn't have the luxury of a shack to live in, so we pitched our tents on the shore, as you see here. Getting onto these islands is very tricky, and this was one of the ones that we had trouble with. There's a little bit of a fringing reef out there, and you can see that this is a very calm day, but sometimes it isn't so calm, and there are big waves coming in. But our time on these islands was so limited, we wanted to get in no matter what. And so we'd wait in a rubber boat. Usually we just have a little rubber dinghy that you had to paddle, and we'd wait and count the waves. And you probably know that every seventh wave is a larger wave than the preceding 6. And many people would say, well, that's an old wives' tale, but it's pretty true. It wasn't always exactly the case, but we would sit out where the waves were breaking, and we would count waves. And we'd count several dozen waves until we thought we had the sense of the pattern. And then when we could identify a 7th wave, we would say, okay, this is it. We'd all paddle like the dickens for the shore. And sometimes we'd get in scot-free and roll up on the shore and pull the raft on up with all of our gear in it, and we'd be bone dry. Other times we wouldn't. We'd have either gauged it incorrectly, or the next wave was also a big one, and it would come in and tip us up like this over, and everybody would get wet. The gear would get all strewn. It would usually wash up on the shore somewhere, but sometimes it wasn't so nice to have it all wet when you're arriving for 3 or 4 days on an island like this. Frigate birds on McKean. This is the lesser frigate bird, and this male has been displaying, and the gular pouch is not quite back to normal. Normally that would be flush with the feathers up here on the neck, but it's still distended a little bit. And the bird in the background there is the female. These are immature lesser frigate birds, and as you can see, there are quite a few of them on this island. McKean is a tiny island. It's 90 acres, and as you're probably aware, an acre is about the same size as a football field. So picture 90 football fields. That's the size of this island. And the estimate we made of the seabirds on this island in the 60s when we were there was 1 million birds. That figures out to 11,000 birds per acre. And so it was impossible to move anywhere without encountering seabirds. And the seabirds on this island were making full use of the space because there were birds like the boobies, which were perched in any shrubs that there were up this high or so. There were birds roosting on the ground and nesting on the ground. And there were birds like the petrels and shearwaters that were nesting in burrows under the ground. So you had apartment living on this island. They were making use of every inch of it. These are black noddies, the adult on the left, the female on the, the immature on the right. A tern that feeds quite close to the island. Usually you can see these terns in flocks out no more than a quarter mile from the island. And they'd come back and they'd roost on the island every night. Here's a little collection of black noddies. They would nest in shrubs like this when they had the opportunity. This is blue-gray noddy, and it's one of the birds that is the first to disappear when there are rats on an island. They're a tiny little thing. They're no bigger than about that. Very delicate, and they don't go very far from land either, and they come back to roost on their island. Well, in 2004, this Korean fishing vessel came up onto McKean Island. Up to this point, there were no rats, there were no cats, any kind of predators on McKean Island. That's why there were such numbers there. But there were black rats on this fishing vessel, and they came ashore. And so the populations of the blue-gray noddies and the white-throated stone petrels completely gone. All the other bird population declined precipitously with the arrival of the rats. And in 2009, an expedition was funded by New Zealand AID, their aid program, foreign aid program. They funded an expedition to go out here and to remove all of the rats on the island. It was successful. There was a trip there in 2011 and another trip in 2012, which confirmed that the rats were completely gone from the island. And by 2012, they could already see lots of the seabirds coming back. Very successful. There's the culprit right there. That's the Asiatic black rat. This is Phoenix Island, the island that is the namesake for the whole group, and it's slightly larger than McKean Island. It's 100 acres, rather not 90 acres. Phoenix Island has never had any rats on it at all, nor cats, and so it's in pretty good shape. One of the birds that occurs on Phoenix Island is the Phoenix petrel. Here's a petrel. You notice this petrel has a very deep and very stout bill. That's characteristic of petrels as opposed to shearwaters, which have long, slender bills. This is an Audubon shearwater, which breeds not in burrows on Phoenix Island, but right on the surface. Audubon shearwaters occur in the tropics and subtropics all the way around the world on islands. This is sort of a typical colony of lesser frigate birds. Now, a frigate bird has a wingspan like this. We're talking big birds. We're talking birds the size of geese. And so you can imagine the bird flesh that is there on the island. It's just solid birds from wall to wall. This is European rabbits. European rabbits were introduced to Phoenix Island back in the days of the guano mining on that island, back in the 1880s. And The rabbits didn't eat the birds, but they ate the vegetation. And here's a little clump of sesuvium that was just eaten right to the bone by the rabbits. I'm happy to say that as of 2011, the rabbits are no longer there. And I'm sure that all of the seabirds on Phoenix Island agree with me that that's a good thing. Okay, we're going to go now to Pitcairn Island. Pitcairn is one of a group of islands. It's actually the second largest of the islands, Henderson being the largest. Henderson is a raised coral atoll, and I'd give anything to be able to go to Henderson. Never been there. It has several endemic land birds. Endemic means occurs there and only there. And we got to go to Pitcairn on a cruise of the Lindblad Explorer. I was lucky enough to be a lecturer on board the Lindblad Explorer for 2 months, and we started our cruises. There were 2 cruises back to back, and we started them in the Philippines in Manila, and we went from there to Easter Island with a stop in a lot of stops, but with a whole new bunch of customers getting on board in Fiji. So from from the Philippines to Fiji was the first half, and from Fiji to Easter Island was the second half. One of the places we went was Pitcairn Island, and Pitcairn and Easter Island have had a long history of human habitation, and as a consequence, they don't have much in the way of seabirds, but they do have their bright spots. Pitcairn is about 2 miles long and 1 mile wide. The town is Adamstown, and it has a population as of 2011 of 67 people. You'll recall that Pitcairn was the island where the mutineers from the mutiny on the Bounty ended up. At that point, there were no people living on Pitcairn. There never had been, as far as they could tell. And the Bounty, when it came back to port, was sent back out again after refitting to try to track down the mutineers. And they actually did find them on Pitcairn. And there is evidence of the Bounty there to this day. Here's the boat shed at Pitcairn. It's big enough to hold four of those whale boats. And here's a bird's eye view of the harbor. It's a very small harbor, and you can see the dock there. And there's a little boat. There's a little rubber boat sitting right there. And those big whale boats would come in, tie up there, and then they would haul them out. And this is the boat shed right here. Here's one of the boats right here. There's one of the whale boats coming in, probably from a fishing expedition. And this is a part of Adamstown, perched rather precariously on steep ground. Not anything like the atolls that we've been looking at. Some relics from the old days. This is a cannon from the Bounty. On the left, the upper right is the burial ground of Fletcher Christian, who was the head of the mutineers, and his family. And the lower right is yours truly with an anchor from the Bounty, and that's the courthouse for Pitcairn Island in the background.
Wow, you have a long beard.
This is a Pitcairn reed warbler, which is unique to Pitcairn Island, and it's about the only bird I saw on the island during my day there. But it's a nice bird to have seen. Raise your hand if you saw a Pitcairn Island warbler in your life. I thought so. We're going to go to Easter Island next. Picture of Easter. It's a big island. It's 17 by 38 miles. And there's some areas I want to point out to you. Let's see. This is the main built-up area. There's 3 primary volcanoes here and here and here that actually formed the island. There's a small crater here that was once a small volcano called Rano Raraku. Remember that one? And down here, this is Orongo, right here. And I want to point out also down here, Motu Nui. We'll be going to Motu Nui. Well, not surprisingly, this is what greets you when you come ashore on Easter Island. This is a moai, M-O-A-I, and it's made of volcanic rock called tuff, T-U-F-F, which is fairly easily worked using basalt adzes and chisels, which the Easter Islanders used. And so from about the 1100s to the 1600s, they made a lot of these moai. This moai is undressed, however. That one is dressed. It has a pukao on its head, a top knot, and the top knot is made of scoria, which is also a volcanic rock. It's red, and it's very much lighter than any of the other rocks on the island. So getting it up on top wasn't quite the feat that you might think it was. But there's a lot of controversy about how these moai got distributed around the island. It's a big island, as I said, nearly 40 miles long. And so the only place on the island where these things were mined was that Ranu Raraku that I pointed out to you. Here's a collection of moai on an altar, and you can see that that this platform has been very carefully put together. These are water-worn pebbles or cobbles rather, and so they go up carefully, and everyone put in place, and they were probably gathered throughout the island and brought here for this purpose. And you've got a collection of moai, some of which had their pukao in place, and some didn't. This platform is called an ahu. Here is a moai which has been carved, but it hasn't quite been finished, and so it's still part of the bedrock. And it's sitting on the hillside with Rano Raraku all around it. About a quarter of the moai got erected around the periphery of the island. Half of the moai are still in place in Rano Raraku, either carved or not, but they're there. And then the last quarter is here and there all around the island. Now in the 1600s, war broke out on Easter Island. The population at that time was about 15,000 people, and they had pretty well finished off all the wood that was on the island. Initially, it's pretty clear that the island was forested, but they finished off all the wood for a variety of purposes. They made boats out of it. They did a lot of things, but by the 1600s, they were captive on their own island. They couldn't get off. And then in the 1700s, the wars gradually came to an end. A lot of people were killed during the wars, but then a Peruvian slave ship came to the island and captured about half of the remaining population, including the preeminent chief, the successor to that chief, and all of the spiritual leaders of the island. And as a consequence, much of the cultural history and the cultural underpinnings of that society were lost, and there was somewhat chaos reigned for 100 or more years. So these are remnants of the early days. This is basalt rock, and this is at Vinapu, which was the cultural center of the island back in those days. And you can see, those of you who might have been to Machu Picchu can see a very strong resemblance between these magnificently carefully carved basalt rocks and the rocks that form some of the buildings at Machu Picchu. It's just extraordinary. And how they carved these basalt rocks. Basalt is very tough, exceedingly tough. And how they carved them, I just can't imagine. This is Motu Nui. Motu Nui means large island, not to be confused with Motu Iti, which is this island right here, the small island. Figures prominently in the cult that replaced the ancestor cult, which was responsible for the creation of all of the Moai. By 1760, the Moai were out. They had all been knocked down onto their faces, and the new cult was the Birdman cult. I mean, you can't think of a better name for a cult than that. The Birdman was the chief of the island for a year, and in order to become the Birdman, you would assemble up here on this site. This is at Orongo, and the Birdman was the first person who could get from that site down the cliff across to Motu Nui and hold the first sooty turn and hold it erect. And if you were the first person to do that, you were the chief for the year.
Kind of like the election.
So we're going out to Motu Nui now. I managed to line up a boat and a couple of Easter Islanders to take us out there. And the great treasure for me on Motu Nui was not a sooty tern egg. I'd seen thousands of them, but this Kermadec petrel, which was a new. I'd seen this petrel at sea before a lot of times, but this is the first one I'd ever seen nesting on an island. It's a bird of the farther South Pacific, particularly to the west, but also in these in this island group. And so that was treasure enough for me. So that just about ends our trip. We're going to end on Easter Island. And Ron, can you do the honors? I want to show you one more thing. Whoop, how did we get there? We got back to the beginning. I didn't mean to do that. We missed our final slide, but that's all right. Just go to the. All right. Okay. Now this is a manufactured moai that these people put together, took to Easter Island, because they had a theory that they could make these moai walk to the sites where they would be erected. There were a lot of other theories having to do with the use of wooden ladders and wooden Y-shaped sledges and dragging the sledges along or sliding the moai across on ladders. But it just seems to me that this is so much easier to get your moai to walk to its site. So I'll leave it up to you. It hasn't been settled yet, but if I were you, I would vote for having the moai walk there rather than pushing it there. Well, somehow I went right past my final shot, which was the. Oh, go all the way to the bottom. Can you do that? There. Okay, there we are. There's the final shot. Thank you very much.